everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack one of the most deeply unsettling documented mysteries in American history. It's a story that operates in that very narrow space between the empirically verifiable and the genuinely unknown. We're looking at a terrifying 13-month period of high strangeness, but it's anchored, inescapably, in a very real, very devastating human tragedy. We're taking an exhaustive, deep dive into the Mothman prophecies and the collapse of the Silver Bridge. I want to start right here, 46. On December 15th, 1967, 46 people lost their lives when a bridge collapsed into the freezing waters of the Ohio River. Now, we are going to explore some deeply bizarre and unexplained phenomena today, but we absolutely must handle this history with respect. The people who experienced these events were real. The victims were real. This isn't cheap sensationalism. This is the story of a community carrying a profound trauma that honestly remains unresolved to this day. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. First, the Silver Bridge collapse. Second, 13 months of dread. Third, the Men in Black. Fourth, the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. Fifth, the metallurgy of a disaster. And finally, the open question. Section 1. The Silver Bridge collapse. To truly understand this mystery, we actually need to begin at the end of the timeline. We've got to anchor this explainer in the undeniable, verifiable tragedy that frames absolutely everything else. It was December 15, 1967 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, 5:05 in the evening, peak rush hour. The Silver Bridge, which was a 1928 steel suspension bridge over the Ohio River, was packed with about 36 vehicles, families heading home from work, sitting on a structure as familiar as any in their lives. And at exactly 5:04 p.m., the bridge didn't creak, it didn't sway, it simply fell. In seconds, it dropped entirely into the freezing river and 46 people died. But here is the irreducible core of the mystery. For 13 months prior to this exact moment, the town had been plagued by dozens of terrifying, consistent sightings of an anomalous creature. And on the exact day the bridge fell, those bizarre sightings abruptly, permanently stopped. Section 2. 13 months of dread. So, to understand how strange those 13 months really were, we have to transition backwards in time. We need to move away from the disaster and funnel down into the granular timeline of the sightings. The flap actually began quietly in November 1966, when 5 gravediggers saw a large brown human-shaped figure flying low over the trees. But it just exploded 3 days later, clustering geographically around an abandoned World War II munitions storage site known locally as the TNT area. Reports started flooding in from genuinely terrified locals. You had Marcella Bennett, who actually dropped her infant in shock as a creature rose up right beside her car. Thomas Urry sped to the police station pale and trembling. Ultimately, over 100 people reported encounters. But the encounter that really launched the Mothman into history? That happened on November 15th. 2 young married couples, the Scarberrys and the Mallets, were driving near that TNT area late at night. Suddenly, their headlights illuminated a gray, roughly humanoid figure. It was 6 to 7 feet tall, with huge wings folded against its back. As they sped away in absolute sheer panic, the creature rose up and followed their car. It chased them at speeds topping 100 miles per hour, in a dead, straight line. It kept perfect pace with the vehicle, and crucially, witnesses noted it was gliding effortlessly. Its wings were totally motionless. That specific detail right there makes any ordinary large bird explanation incredibly difficult to swallow. But it wasn't actually the wings that scarred the witnesses. It was the eyes. Multiple independent witnesses with absolutely no connection to one another reported the exact same chilling detail. Large, self-luminous red eyes, set wide apart, literally generating their own light in the dark. And these eyes triggered a remarkably specific reaction. Witnesses consistently described a primal, paralyzing terror that entirely bypassed conscious thought. It wasn't just being startled, it was a deep, intense threat detection response, unlike anything they had ever experienced in their lives. And these encounters, they actually had bizarre physical effects too. In February 1967, an 18-year-old named Connie Carpenter encountered the creature near the Mason County Airport. Uniquely, the creature actually attempted to touch her before she managed to escape. Following this encounter, her eyes became severely inflamed and incredibly painful, and this condition lasted for days. I really want you to consider that. What kind of biological or anomalous presence leaves a witness with physical symptoms akin to radiation exposure or severe electromagnetic interference? Now, you might be wondering, what about skeptical theories? For sure, the most common one is that everyone was just misidentifying a sandhill crane. But let's contrast that hypothesis with the reality of what people actually reported. Yes, okay, a sandhill crane is large, and it does have red skin patches around its eyes, but those patches don't literally glow in the dark. A crane absolutely cannot fly at 100 miles per hour to chase down a speeding car. And a crane certainly doesn't cause severe eye inflammation or trigger the widespread electromagnetic interference with car radios and telephones that was also reported. The skeptical explanations just simply cannot account for the consistent, terrifying data points reported by the locals. Section 3. The Men in Black. As if a giant winged creature wasn't enough, we must transition to the second layer of high strangeness that descended on Point Pleasant during those 13 months. The unannounced, deeply intimidating visits by the Men in Black. These weren't your typical government agents. They were something far stranger. They arrived completely unannounced at witnesses' homes just days after an encounter, aggressively demanding silence. They wore dark suits, but of an unusual, almost outdated cut. Their skin tone was described as olive or unnervingly gray. Their movements were slightly mechanical. Witnesses noted that their facial features were individually normal, but combined, they looked somehow wrong. And terrifyingly, they possessed intimate details of private sightings that hadn't been released to the press or anyone else. Witnesses consistently found their almost human nature to be even more disturbing than the monster in the woods. Now, what's really interesting here is a specific encounter involving local journalist Mary Heyer. She had been rigorously documenting the sightings. One day, a short man with unusually thick glasses and a dark suit entered her office. He was deeply unsettling, instinctively wrong. During the visit, Mary actually caught him staring at an ordinary ballpoint pen on her desk. He picked it up with this complete, childlike fascination, turning it over and over like he had literally never seen such a basic piece of technology in his life. Then, out of nowhere, he lets out this bizarre laugh, drops the pen, and literally runs out of the office. Section 4. The Ultra-Terrestrial Hypothesis. So, what does this all mean? How do we process a town besieged by a winged creature, paralyzing red eyes, and almost human men fascinated by ballpoint pens? We need a theoretical framework to try and make sense of this bizarre intersection of folklore and reality. Enter John Keel. He was a rigorous, highly skeptical investigative journalist who arrived in Point Pleasant fully intending to debunk the whole thing. But then he documented the physical evidence, the phone line interference, the genuine terror of the witnesses, and he changed his mind. He didn't become a sensationalist, though, and he explicitly rejected the simple idea that these were extraterrestrials arriving in spaceships. Instead, he formulated a deeply thought-provoking framework. Keel called it the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. He proposed that the Mothman and the Men in Black were actually manifestations of non-human intelligences that have always shared the Earth with us. They just operate in dimensions or frequency ranges that we simply cannot perceive. Crucially, he argued that these entities manifest in forms calibrated to a community's specific cultural context. So, hundreds of years ago, maybe they appeared as demons or angels. In mid-20th century America, they look like UFO aliens and monsters. Keel essentially suggested this creature was a manifestation produced for this specific community, right at a moment of impending crisis. Section 5. Metallurgy of a Disaster. And that impending crisis brings us forcefully back out of the paranormal theories and plunges us straight into the cold, clinical, and brutal reality of structural engineering. Because no matter what was haunting those woods, a bridge was about to fall. The Silver Bridge didn't fall because of a curse or a monster, it fell because of metallurgy. Specifically, it fell because of I-bar 330 in the bridge's north suspension chain. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation into this was incredibly thorough. Here is step-by-step exactly what happened. Deep inside I-bar 330, a microscopic stress corrosion crack had formed. Over decades, a process called hydrogen embrittlement, which was a flaw from the original 1928 manufacturing, worsened this entirely invisible defect. Finally, on that freezing December evening, under the sheer weight of rush hour traffic, I-bar 330 snapped. The extreme load instantly transferred to the adjacent bars, triggering a cascading, instantaneous, catastrophic failure of the entire suspension chain. The brutal engineering reality here is that the 1928 I-bar chain design had zero redundancy. None. If one link failed, the whole bridge failed. And worse, back in 1967, ultrasonic testing just didn't exist in standard bridge inspections. There was literally no way for inspectors to see that internal crack. This disaster was a mechanical inevitability. In fact, this specific tragedy led directly to the creation of the modern, rigorous U.S. bridge inspection system that we rely on today. Section 6. The open question. Which brings us to our final section. We have to navigate the unresolved tension between the cold, hard engineering facts of the collapse and the deeply weird coincidences of the 13 months that preceded it. So the crucial point is trying to reconcile the prophetic claims. In the weeks before the collapse, there were widespread reports of prophetic dreams involving drowning and the bridge. Some witnesses reported men in black, specifically warning them to avoid the bridge on certain dates. John Keel himself claimed he received a bizarre, anomalous phone call on the morning of December 15th, warning of a disaster. And most glaringly, there's the exact, abrupt cessation of all Mothman sightings, the literal minute the bridge fell. Now, skeptics rightly point out that a stressed community will naturally engage in retrospective pattern matching. But ask yourself, how would you or your community try to make sense of this if you were in their shoes? Because to the people who lived it, these felt like genuine premonitions. Think about how you might process such an overwhelming, incomprehensible communal trauma. This brilliantly illustrates how Point Pleasant holds that tension today. They carry the grief and the strangeness simultaneously. They mourn the 46 victims, and they acknowledge the massive engineering legacy born from the tragedy. But they also process the trauma through the legend, right? They've got a Mothman museum, a towering 12-foot stainless steel statue, and an annual festival. It isn't just kitsch tourism, it's a profound way of communal processing, a way to hold on to a history that simply cannot be fully explained. We're left with two timelines that collided on a cold December evening. Was the creature a harbinger, a manifestation drawn to the threshold of an inevitable disaster? Or was it all just an astonishing coincidence, born of misidentification and communal stress? We may never have a definitive answer, but what we do know for sure is that 46 people died in the river that night, and the town that lost them has never stopped watching the sky. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.